The stars were quiet that night in the endless dark of space. A lone human ship drifted slowly above a ruined planet. Its captain, a man named Elias, stood at the observation deck, his eyes watching the broken world below. He had traveled far, he had seen war and silence, but what he saw on this planet gave him a strange feeling he could not name. The planet was once alive, once green and filled with alien cities. Now it was nothing but ashes, broken towers, and silent streets. No light moved in the shadows. No voices rose from the ruins. Only smoke curled upward into the black sky, as if the ground itself was crying. Captain Elias thought he was alone. His scanners showed little life, just small heat signals like sparks that refused to die. He wondered if any survivors remained, perhaps a few, hiding in the dark, clinging to life while the world around them fell apart. He did not expect anyone to approach him. He did not expect to hear footsteps on the dry soil when he landed his small shuttle near the ruins. But then, he saw her, a woman, not human, her skin pale like the moon, her eyes large and filled with sorrow. Behind her stood two small children, thin and weak, their faces half hidden as they clung to her long robe. The woman walked forward with slow steps, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. When she spoke, her voice was shaking, but her words were clear. "My children are well behaved. I can be a good wife to you, human," she said. Captain Elias froze. He had heard many things in his travels. He had faced pleas for food, for water, for freedom, but never had he heard such words, spoken with such desperation. He stared at her, uncertain, not sure if this was real or some trick of the ruined land. The woman lowered her head. Her children pressed closer to her legs, afraid yet hopeful. She repeated herself, this time softer. "My child. Ren are well behaved. I can serve. I can help. I can be what you need. Just do not leave us here." Elias felt his chest tighten. He was a soldier once, trained to keep distance, trained to follow rules. But here, in front of him, stood a family broken by war, begging not for gold, not for power, but simply for survival. The silence around them was heavy. The wind blew dust across the broken ground, carrying the smell of smoke and iron. The captain's hand rested on his sidearm, not out of threat, but out of habit. His eyes studied her carefully, searching for lies, for traps, for anything that could explain this strange encounter. But all he saw was truth. Her thin arms shook as she held her children close. Her back was bent, not from weakness, but from the weight of too much loss. The children's eyes were wide, hungry, afraid, yet glowing with a small spark of hope. He wanted to speak, but words would not come. He wanted to turn away, but his feet refused to move. The woman's plea echoed in his mind again and again. "My children are well behaved. I can be a good wife to you, human." Why would she say such a thing, he wondered. Why would she offer herself like this to a stranger? What horrors had she faced that made her think this was the only way to survive? He looked at her children, their thin arms, their empty eyes. He thought of his own past, of families he could not save, of battles where innocent lives were lost. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir inside him, something human. Still, suspicion remained. Was this a trap? Was she bait to lure him into danger? The planet was still dangerous. Enemy ships might circle above, scavengers might lurk nearby. He could not trust easily, yet he could not ignore her either. The woman stepped closer. Her hands trembled as she lifted them slowly, palms open, showing she carried no weapon, her chi. Children followed, whispering in a tongue he could not understand, but their eyes begged louder than words ever could. Elias remained still, the silence stretched long like a blade held at the edge of breaking. The air was filled with tension, with a question unspoken. Would he accept them or leave them to the ruins? Far above, his ship gave a soft warning sound. The scanners had detected something, faint signals, perhaps movement in orbit, but Elias did not look up. His eyes remained locked on the widow and her children. She whispered again, barely louder than the wind, "Please, human, do not turn away." And in that moment, the strange encounter became something far greater, a meeting of two worlds, a test of trust, a beginning of a story that neither of them could yet see. The captain did not speak, not yet. He only stood in silence, his thoughts heavy, his choice unfinished, while the widow and her children waited, hope burning quietly in the shadows of a dying world. The night grew colder on the ruined planet. The human captain, Elias, stood in silence as the alien widow and her children waited. He did not answer her strange plea, not yet. Instead, he studied her face, her trembling hands, and the fear that lived inside her eyes. She saw his silence, and she feared it meant rejection. So she began to speak, her voice soft but urgent. If he would not accept her words, maybe her story would make him understand. "My people were once proud," she whispered, her gaze falling to the broken ground. "We lived in shining towers. We sang under the stars, and we were not afraid. Her voice carried both pride and grief, as if every memory was a blade inside her chest. The children pressed close to her sides as she spoke. They listened quietly, as if they had heard the story many times before. It was their lullaby and their nightmare, the tale of a life they had lost. "We were strong," she said, "but we were not prepared for the war." She looked up at the captain, her eyes filled with pain. "They came without warning, they came with fire, and they broke everything we built." Images flashed in Elias's mind as she spoke. He had seen such wars before. He had seen innocent cities turn to ash. The widow's words painted the same picture he had witnessed across the stars, a picture of destruction, greed, and endless cruelty. "My husband fought them," she continued, her voice breaking. "He stood with the defenders of our colony. He was brave, but bravery could not stop their weapons." She held her children tighter. The day he fell, the skies burned red and the ground shook with their machines. Her words came like waves, slow and heavy. Each one pulled Elias deeper into her world of sorrow. He could see the truth in her eyes. He could hear the cracks in her voice. This was no trick, no game. This was survival carved into her very soul. The widow paused, her lips trembling. For a moment, she seemed too weak to continue, but the children looked up at her, their small hands clinging to her robe, and she forced herself to go on. "They killed our leaders, they shattered our armies, and then they hunted the survivors," she said. "We fled into the ruins, hiding from their patrols, scavenging for food, drinking from broken pipes." Her eyes darkened with the memory. They wanted not only our world but our spirit. They wanted us erased. Elias felt his throat tighten. He had heard stories like this on other worlds, but standing before the widow, listening to her pain, it became more than just another tale of war. It became personal, raw, and dangerously human. She reached out a hand as if showing him something invisible. "I buried my husband with my own hands," she said. "My children were crying, but there was no time for grief, only fear, only hunger." Her voice cracked, but she did not stop. "I told them their father was brave. I told them he died so they could live, but inside I feared it was a lie." The children lowered their heads. They had heard these words before, too many times. Elias could see their small bodies trembling, could see the hunger in their hollow faces. They were too young to carry such heavy pain, yet they carried it anyway. The widow drew in a sharp breath. She looked at Elias with desperate eyes. "Then I heard whispers of humans," she said. "Stories told in the dark. Stories of men and women who fought back, who stood against the enemy when no one else dared." She leaned closer, her voice filled with hope and fear. "They said humans were strong, that humans protected their own, that humans could save us." Elias felt the weight of her words strike him like a hammer. To her, to her children, he was not just a man, he was a symbol, a chance, a savior. She did not beg because she wanted comfort, she begged because she wanted life. "My children are well behaved," she repeated softly. "They will not cause you trouble. They will obey, and I can be useful. I can clean, I can work, I can serve. If only you let us live under your shadow." The ruins around them creaked in the cold wind. The silence after her words was heavier than stone. Elias looked at her, looked at the children, and felt the pull of two worlds tearing inside him. Duty told him to walk away. His mission was not to save survivors, not to carry strangers across the stars. But his heart, long buried beneath steel and command, whispered that he could not leave them. Not after hearing this, not after seeing them. He opened his mouth to speak, but before words could form, his ship sent another warning, sharper this time, louder, enemy signals growing stronger, closer, perhaps hunting, perhaps already here. The widow heard the sound too, and fear filled her face. She clutched her children tightly, whispering in her own language, a prayer perhaps, or a goodbye. Then she looked back at Elias, her eyes begging, "If you leave now, they will find us, and it will end here." The human captain stood still, his hand tightening on his weapon, his heart pounding in his chest. The past she carried was full of pain, but the future waiting for her was darker still. If he chose wrong, she and her children would vanish into the ashes like so many before them. And so the story of her past became the weight of his present, a test he could not ignore, a choice he could not escape. The widow had given him her truth, raw and unbroken. Now he had to decide if he would give her hope. The cold wind swept through the broken city, carrying dust and whispers. Captain Elias stood facing the widow and her children, the echo of her story still heavy in his mind. Her voice, her sorrow, her desperate plea, none of it would leave him, yet his training, his instincts, all screamed caution. He had learned long ago that pity could be a weapon, that soft words and tears could hide sharp blades. He had walked into traps before, and men had died because of his choices. Now, with every second that passed, he felt the old fear return. Elias kept his hand near his weapon, his eyes locked on the widow. Her children clung to her robe, their thin faces looking up at him with hope. But hope was dangerous, he told himself. Hope made men weak, and weakness got them killed. The widow took a step closer, her hands still raised to show she carried nothing. "We have nothing left," she whispered. "Only our lives." Her words cut through the silence, but Elias did not reply. His heart battled his mind, each fighting to rule his decision. He turned his gaze to the horizon. Ruined towers stood like broken teeth against the pale sky. Somewhere out there, enemy patrols could be moving. His ship's alarms had warned him already. Signals were near, too near. If he took the widow and her children aboard, they would slow him down. They would eat his supplies, use his air, weaken his mitzvah. Sion, he was not here to save strangers. He was here to explore, to report, to survive. But could he really walk away, leaving them to be hunted like animals? Elias clenched his jaw, memories flooding back. He remembered another colony, years ago. He and his men had walked away from survivors then, following orders. Days later, when they returned, they found only ashes, only bones. The screams he had not heard that day still haunted his dreams. The widow's eyes studied him carefully. Perhaps she saw his hesitation. Perhaps she saw the shadows of his past written on his face. She whispered again, almost like a prayer. "Please, human, do not let my children be bones in the dust." Elias's chest tightened. He hated the way her words pulled at him. He hated the way her children's silent stares made him feel like a man, not a soldier. He had built walls inside himself to survive, and now, in this ruined place, those walls were cracking. Still, he doubted, what if she was lying? What if behind those ruins more of her kind waited with weapons? What if this was not a widow but a spy? What if the children were not helpless but bait? Suspicion wrapped around him like a chain, refusing to let go. He stepped back slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Why me?" he asked at last, his voice rough. The widow blinked, surprised. "Out of all the stars, out of all the beings in the galaxy, why beg a human?" Elias pressed. Her lips parted, but no words came at first, only trembling silence. Then she said, "Because humans fight when others surrender, because humans give hope when others take it away." Her answer struck him like a blade. It was not flattery, it was not sweet words. It was belief, raw and dangerous. She was not only begging for life, she was begging for proof that her stories were true. Elias turned away, his boots crunching on the broken ground. His ship's warning alarms grew sharper. Time was running out, and still his heart and mind battled inside him. If he chose to help, he risked everything. If he chose to leave, he risked becoming a monster. The children's voices broke the silence, soft and weak. One whispered, "Mother, will the human go?" The other whispered back, "No, he will save us. I feel it." Their words pierced Elias more deeply than any weapon could. He shut his eyes, trying to push away the doubt, but doubt was louder than faith. He saw traps in every shadow, danger in every word. He could not trust them, not yet, not fully, and yet he could not walk away either. The widow lowered her head, perhaps sensing his hesitation. Her shoulders sagged, her hands trembled, but then she lifted her chin, her voice steady. "If you leave us, we will die. If you take us, we may live. I cannot offer more than that truth." The air grew colder, the sky darker. Above them, clouds moved like restless ghosts. His ship's console flashed again, enemy signals closing in. Soon the choice would no longer be his. Soon the enemy would make it for him. Elias stood frozen, doubt gnawing at his bones. Every instinct told him to walk away, to stay alive, to complete his mission. But every part of his heart told him to take the risk, to be more than just a soldier. He could not decide, not yet. The widow waited, silent now, her children pressing close. They did not cry, they did not beg, they only looked at him, and in their eyes he saw something more powerful than fear. He saw belief, belief in him, belief in humans, belief that he could be the answer. Elias felt the weight of their trust like iron on his shoulders. He doubted himself, he doubted them, he doubted the future, but he could not escape the truth. Whatever choice he made now would shape not only their fate, but his own. The alarms grew louder, the signals closer, the night around the ruins trembled with the promise of danger, and Elias, standing between his doubt and his duty, knew the time for choice was near. The ruined city lay silent, but the silence was not peace. It was the silence before thunder, the silence before death. Captain Elias felt it in his bones. The air was too heavy, the shadows too still. His ship's alarms were not lying. Something was out there. Something was watching. The widow felt it too, her body stiff, her eyes wide as she held her children close. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. The children pressed themselves against her, sensing the fear in her heartbeat. Even without machines, they could feel the enemy drawing near. Elias looked up at the sky. Dark clouds rolled above the ruined towers, and behind them faint flashes of light. Not lightning, no. These were engines, ships moving quietly, searching. The hunters had returned, and they would not stop until they found every survivor. The widow whispered, her voice shaking. They always come back. They search the ruins. They drag us out. They make sure none of us live. Her words carried the weight of memory, not imagination. She had seen them before, had hidden from them before, had lost everything because of them. Elias's hand tightened on his weapon. He was not afraid for himself, not yet. He had fought battles, faced worse odds, but with the widow and her children here, every step, every choice carried more weight. His ship spoke again in a low hum. Warning symbols flickered on the display at his wrist. 3 signals, moving slowly through the upper atmosphere, circling like vultures above a corpse. They were not random. They were searching, hunting, patient as wolves. The widow's voice broke the silence once more. If you leave us here, they will find us. It will not take long. And when they do, my children will not scream. They will only close their eyes because they know what comes. Her words struck Elias harder than any weapon. The calm way she spoke of death chilled his. Her children were too young to carry such knowledge, yet their eyes showed no surprise, no denial, only quiet fear. Elias turned his gaze on her sharply. You knew they would come, he said. The widow nodded slowly. They always come. It is only a matter of when, not if. He cursed under his breath. He wanted to believe he had time to think, time to decide, but time had already been stolen. The enemy's shadow had fallen over them, and choice was narrowing to a single path. The widow stepped closer, her voice low, urgent. If you take us, they will chase you. If you leave us, they will kill us. Either way, they will not stop. Her eyes met his, strong now, no longer begging, but warning. You must decide if you fight them, or if you let them win again. Elias felt the old battle fire stir inside him. He had run from too many wars, obeyed too many cold orders. Here in these ruins, standing before one desperate widow and 2 silent children, he felt the line of choice burning clearer than ever. Fight or abandon. Live as a soldier or live as a man. Above, one of the enemy ships broke through the clouds, its dark shape gliding slowly. Scanning beams flashing over the ruins. Elias cursed again, grabbing the widow's arm, pulling her closer. We have to move, he hissed. Her children followed instantly. No protest, no sound, only obedience. She had told the truth. They were well behaved, their silence sharper than screams. The group moved through the broken streets, shadows twisted, rubble crunched under their boots. Elias kept one hand on his weapon, the other guiding them forward. Every corner felt dangerous, every sound too loud. The widow whispered as they ran. They destroyed us because we resisted. They wanted our world for their machines. They wanted us gone so their empire could grow. Her words spilled between breaths, sharp and bitter. They are not hunters. They are erasers. They erase everything they touch. Elias had heard of such enemies, cold, merciless races that swept across the stars, leaving silence behind. But to hear it from her lips, to see it through her broken eyes, made the truth heavier. This was not just a war. This was survival against extinction. Another beam of light swept across the ruins. The ground trembled as a low hum filled the air. The enemy ship was descending, its engines growling like a beast ready to strike. Dust shook loose from the broken towers, covering them in a gray haze. The widow clutched her children tight, whispering in her own tongue. Elias did not understand the words, but he knew the meaning. It was not prayer. It was not hope. It was a mother's promise that she would shield them with her own body if death came. Elias stopped, scanning the street ahead. His ship was not far, just beyond the next broken wall. If they reached it, they had a chance. If they failed, the enemy would swallow them whole. He looked at the widow, at her children, at the shadows of the hunters moving above. The choice he had delayed was no longer waiting. It was here, burning in front of him, demanding answer. Take them, fight, risk everything, or leave them. Walk away, live with silence. The widow met his eyes, her voice steady. We have nowhere else to run, human. If you walk away, we end here. The ground shook again as the enemy ship descended lower. Its massive frame blocked the faint light of the stars, casting the ruins in deeper shadow. The hunters were here, their shadow covering all, and Captain Elias knew he could no longer doubt. He had to choose, and he had to choose now. The shadow of the enemy ship covered the ruins. Its engines growled above like a beast circling prey. The broken city shook as dust and ash fell from the tall skeleton towers. Captain Elias knew the time for thinking was over. The time for choosing had come. He stood wet. The widow and her children pressed close to him. Their wide eyes looked up at him, waiting, trusting. Her voice whispered once more, "If you leave us, we end here. If you take us, we may live." Elias's heart pounded like war drums. His soldier's mind told him to run alone, to escape quickly, to survive. But his human heart, buried for years under duty and orders, told him another truth. If he left them, he would never forgive himself. Not now, not ever. The enemy ship's beam of light swept across the ruins. It moved slowly, searching every crack, every shadow. Soon it would find them. Soon there would be no escape. The widow pulled her children tighter, their small hands clinging to her robe. They did not cry, they did not scream, they only waited, silent and still. Elias clenched his teeth. He remembered the widow's story, her husband's sacrifice, her struggle to keep her children alive. He remembered the screams of another colony he had abandoned years ago. He would not repeat that mistake, not this time, not with them. He turned sharply to the widow, his voice firm. "Follow me, do not stop, do not make a sound." Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through her fear. She nodded quickly, whispering something soft to her children. They straightened, their little bodies tense but ready. Elias led them through the rubble, moving quickly but low. His ship was just ahead, hidden behind a broken wall and a collapsed tower. Every step was heavy with danger, every breath tight with fear. Above, the enemy ship circled lower, its engines rumbling like thunder. The widow stumbled on the uneven ground, but Elias caught her arm, pulling her forward. Her children moved like shadows, small and silent. It was as if they had practiced this many times before. They had lived too long with hunters chasing them. They knew how to hide, how to survive. At last, they reached. Against the broken wall, Elias pressed his back against it, peering out toward his ship. The sleek vessel waited in the open square, its silver hull glowing faintly in the dim light. Safety was so close, yet so far. The enemy ship hovered just above, its scanning beams sliding dangerously near. Elias knew they had only moments. He turned to the widow again, his voice low but sharp. "When I move, you run with the children, straight to the ship. Do not stop, no matter what happens." The widow's lips parted, fear flickering in her eyes. "What about you?" she whispered. "I will cover you," he answered, his tone leaving no room for argument. The widow pressed her forehead briefly to her children's heads. She whispered something in her tongue, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a promise. Then she looked back at Elias, her eyes fierce despite her fear. "We will obey," she said. Elias took a deep breath, his hand tightening on his weapon. Then, with a sudden movement, he stepped out from behind the wall. His figure broke into the open square, drawing the scanning beam. It swung toward him instantly, bright and blinding. "Now!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the night. The widow grabbed her children's hands and ran, their small feet pounding against the broken stone. They moved fast, their thin figures darting across the open ground toward the waiting ship. Elias fired his weapon at the enemy beam, sparks of light flashing through the air. The ship's alarm screamed louder. More signals now, more hunters dropping through the clouds. Elias fired again, his shots striking the enemy hull, forcing it to rise higher for a moment. It gave the widow just enough time. She reached the human vessel, pulling her children inside the hatch, her breath ragged but unbroken. Elias sprinted after them, his boots hitting the ground hard. The enemy beam swept back, burning the stones where he had stood only moments before. Heat licked at his back as he dove for the hatch. It sealed shut behind him, locking them inside the ship's steel belly. The children collapsed again. As their mother, gasping for breath, the widow held them tight, tears spilling from her eyes, but she did not weep in grief. She wept in relief, in hope. Elias stood at the control panel, his chest heaving, his eyes fierce. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The ship rumbled to life, engines glowing as it lifted from the ruins. Outside, enemy ships roared closer, their shadows filling the sky. The widow clutched her children as the floor shook, her gaze never leaving Elias. "You chose us," she whispered, her voice full of wonder and disbelief. Elias did not answer. His hands moved quickly across the controls. But inside, a storm raged. Yes, he had chosen them, and now he would face whatever came because of it. The enemy would not stop. Not now. Not ever. He had tied his fate to theirs, and theirs to his. As the ship broke through the clouds, flashes of enemy fire lit the night. The hunters had seen their prey escape, and they would give chase. The battle was not yet won, not even begun, but inside the steel walls of the human ship, Hope burned like a new flame. The choice had been made, and the war had truly begun. The engines of the human ship roared as it broke through the cloud cover. Below, the ruined planet shrank, but danger did not fade. Enemy ships followed, dark shapes slicing through the night sky, their weapons glowing red like the eyes of predators. Inside, Captain Elias gripped the controls, his jaw set, his heart steady. The widow clutched her children close in the corner of the cabin, her eyes wide as she watched the enemy ships draw nearer on the glowing screens. Her children trembled, but they did not cry, their small hands gripping the edges of her robe. She whispered soft words in her tongue, words Elias could not understand, but he knew they were promises. The first blast struck, shaking the ship violently. Alarms screamed, red lights flashed across the cabin. Elias cursed under his breath, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship twisted sharply, dodging another beam of energy that split the clouds in two. "They will not stop," the widow said, her voice breaking. "They never stop until everything is destroyed." Elias shot her a glance, his eyes fierce. "They'll stop if I kill them first," he growled. The enemy ships moved in formation, circling, cutting off escape routes. Their weapons charged again, lighting up the dark sky like fire. Elias pulled his vessel into a dive, engines screaming. The ship shook as the air burned around it, but the beams missed, striking empty space. The widow clutched her children tighter, but then she pushed herself to her feet, moving toward Elias. "There is something you must know," she said quickly, her voice urgent. "My husband fought them. He studied their machines. He found their weakness." Elias's eyes narrowed. "What weakness?" he demanded, even as he pulled the ship into another sharp roll. The widow held onto the back of his chair as the ship shook. "Their shields, they are strong against direct fire, but weak when struck at the joints of their armor. The energy bends there," he told me. Elias's lips tightened. That was the kind of knowledge he needed. He adjusted his controls, targeting the nearest enemy ship. The vessel swooped in, its weapons glowing. Elias fired, not at its center, but at the corner where armor met wing. The shot struck, and the enemy ship spun wildly, flames bursting from its side. The widow gasped, her children clutching each other as the burning ship fell into the clouds below. Elias allowed himself a thin smile. "Your husband knew what he was talking about," he said. The widow's voice shook, but there was pride in her eyes. "He died trying to tell others. Now his knowledge lives through me." Another blast shook the ship, jerking them sideways. Two more enemy vessels had closed in, their weapons flashing. Elias gritted his teeth, pushing his ship into a sharp climb. The cabin rattled, the engine screamed, but the vessel obeyed. Above the clouds, stars stretched endless, but freedom was still far. The widow pointed at the screen. "There, strike low, near the engines." Elias fired again, his shots hitting where she said. The enemy ship exploded in a shower of fire and smoke, pieces falling into the night. The last vessel roared closer, its weapons charging. The ship shook as another hit grazed their side, sparks flying inside the cabin. The children screamed, covering their ears. The widow held them, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Do not fear, do not fear. The human fights for us now." Elias's hands moved fast, his eyes burning with focus. He pulled the ship into a tight spin, dodging blasts by inches. Then he aimed, not at the enemy's heart, but at its weak joint. The shot fired, striking true. The enemy ship twisted, flames tearing through its armor. It spiraled down, vanishing into the dark clouds below. Silence filled the cabin for a moment. The alarms still buzzed. Smoke drifted from cracked panels. But the sky outside was empty. The hunters were gone, at least for now. Elias leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving, his hands still tight on the controls. The widow sank to her knees, holding her children close. Tears ran down her face, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief, of survival. She whispered in her tongue, a soft prayer of thanks, her voice breaking. Her children pressed their faces against her, whispering with her. Elias glanced at them, his heart heavy, yet lighter than it had been in years. He had fought, he had chosen, and they had lived, but deep inside. He knew this was only the beginning. The enemy would not forgive, they would not forget, they would return stronger in greater numbers. The widow looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You gave us life," she said softly. Elias shook his head. "No, you gave me a reason to fight again." The ship drifted through the stars now, broken but still alive, scarred but unyielding. The widow held her children close. Elias watched the endless black ahead. The battle was over, but the war was not. And in that silence, after fire and death, something new was born. A fragile bond, a shared survival, a promise unspoken, human and alien, soldier and widow, children of loss. Together they had faced the enemy's shadow, and together they would face what came next. The stars stretched wide and endless beyond the ship's cracked windows. Captain Elias sat in the pilot's chair, his hands still resting on the controls, his body heavy with exhaustion. The battle had ended, but his mind refused to rest. Every beat of silence felt strange after the storm of fire and noise. Behind him, the widow sat with her children curled against her. They were sleeping now, their small faces calm for the first time in many nights. The widow brushed hair from their foreheads gently, her eyes soft, her lips whispering quiet words in her tongue. It was not sorrow she spoke this time. It was comfort. It was the fragile sound of hope. Elias turned in his chair, watching them. For the first time, he allowed himself to see them not as strangers, not as burdens, but as survivors. They had walked through ruins, through loss, through fire, and still they lived, still they carried on. That strength touched him deeper than he expected. The ship's computer beeped softly, showing the damage report: shields burned, fuel running low, weapons half broken. It was a miracle they were still flying. Elias knew he could not return to human command yet, not with enemies chasing, not with danger so close. They needed a safe place, even for a little while. The widow looked up at him, her eyes steady now. "Where will you take us?" she asked, her voice quiet. Elias stared at the stars. "There's a world nearby, forgotten, hidden, once used as a mining base. We can rest there, repair, and plan." She nodded slowly, trusting his word without question. Trust, he realized, was heavier than chains. These lives now depended on him, and for once, he did not feel trapped by that weight. Instead, he felt alive. The ship drifted through the black for hours, engines humming. The children woke, their eyes bright but uncertain. They walked to Elias, small hands clutching the edge of his chair. One whispered, "Will they come back?" Elias glanced down, meeting the child's wide eyes. "Yes," he said honestly. "They will always come back, but we will be ready." The child nodded, strangely calm. It was not blind faith, it was survival. They had lived with fear for too long to believe in perfect safety, but they believed in him, and that was enough. At last, the hidden world appeared on the screen, a gray sphere wrapped in dust clouds, its surface barren, its old mines long abandoned. Elias guided the ship down, landing it in a deep canyon where shadows hid them from the sky. The engines powered off with a final groan, leaving only silence. The widow stepped outside first, her feet touching the cold ground. Her children followed, their eyes wide as they looked at the canyon walls rising high around them. It was empty, lifeless, but to them, it was safety. For the first time in years, they were not running, not hiding, not hunted. Elias walked behind them, scanning the horizon. He felt the stillness of the place settle on him like a cloak. It was not home, but it could be a beginning. The widow turned to him, her voice soft but strong. "You gave us life, Captain. You gave us a future." Elias shook his head, his voice low. "No, you gave me back my humanity." Her eyes softened, her lips trembling with unspoken words, but she did not argue, because deep down, she knew both were true. The children explored the rocks, their laughter echoing faintly through the canyon. It was a small sound, but powerful. Elias froze when he heard it. Laughter, pure and innocent, a sound he had thought was gone from the galaxy. Now it returned, carried by two small voices who had survived the dark. The widow watched them, tears in her eyes. "They smile again," she whispered, as if afraid the sound would break. Elias felt something stir inside him, a flame he thought had died long ago. Hope, fragile but real, yet he knew danger was not gone. The enemy would come. They always came. But now he was not alone. Now he carried a reason to fight, a reason to resist. The widow's knowledge, the children's survival, his own skill. Together they formed something stronger than fear. As the stars rose above the canyon, Elias stood tall. He thought of the widow's first words, her desperate plea. "My children are well behaved. I can be a good wife to you, human." What had begun as desperation had become something else entirely. Not slavery, not bargain, but survival joined with trust. The widow walked to his side, standing quietly, her shaky arms. Children's laughter filled the canyon behind them. Her voice was soft when she spoke. "You are not only our protector, Captain. You are our chance to begin again." Elias looked at her, then at the stars beyond. He knew the war was far from over. But here, in this forgotten place, something new had begun. Not just for her, not just for her children, but for him too. He had found more than survivors. He had found a reason, a bond, a spark of future. And as the night grew deep, the captain, the widow, and the children stood together under the stars. Not as strangers, not as broken souls, but as the first light of a new beginning.